Hello, 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 beautiful and amazing screenwriters, filmmakers, and creative souls. Welcome to episode 59 of the Shoot from the Heart podcast. I'm so happy you are here with me today. And the topic that we're going to be talking about today is creating unforgettable characters. I think this is one of the most important aspects of screenwriting, basically, because writing an unforgettable character is what will get your movie made, even more than writing an incredible plot. The reason for this is quite simply, so many of our films are talent driven. And what that means is they get made because an actor says yes to them. They get funded because talented actors want to play those parts. And if you write a script with incredible characters, the kind of characters that great actors want to play, you have a very strong chance of getting your movie made. Even if you wrote a film with the most amazing plot, if it doesn't have great characters, it's going to be a hard sell because producers can't get actors interested in it and they can't fund the movie. So it's not just because the movie is more satisfying with great characters. It's also that actually nailing this skill, being able to write characters that actors just get into and they believe and they're excited by, is really what's going to get your movie made. What is also true for me about characters, though, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, character is the portal by which we experience the movie. And if we believe the character, we tend to believe the movie and we tend to be engaged in it. And if we don't believe the character, we don't. And what's really interesting to me when I reflect on movies, and I'd love to hear if it's the same for you, when I think back to movies, I will often not remember the plot. In fact, I will rarely remember the plot of a movie. But what I won't forget is the character. But this is why I go for me. I know that it's the character that is the key to the film. It's the character that draws me in. It's the character that makes me care. It's the character that makes me want to stay with the movie. And it's the character that a month later, I still remember, a year later, 2 years later. And you might not remember anything of the story of the movie, but you'll remember the character. If a character is well created and rich and unforgettable, you'll always remember them. They are real to you. You care about them. And this is why it's such an important thing to focus on when you're focusing on your screenwriting. Having a great story, wonderful, amazing. But nobody really watches a movie just for a great story. We watch movies to see characters go through things. People that we relate to, people that we understand, people that we empathize with. And we go on that journey with them and we care about them. And if that's not there, the movie's not that great. One of my favorite filmmakers, Abbas Kiarostami, the Iranian filmmaker, he had a very simple formula for what is a good film and what is a bad film. And I share this often. He says, a good movie is one you believe, a bad movie is one you don't. That's it. That explains it all. A good movie is one you believe. A bad movie is one you don't. If I believe it, then I'm engaged and I'm interested. If I don't believe it, it's not interesting to me. It's pretty much as simple as that. And that starts with the characters. It's because of the characters that I'm either engaged and believe it or I don't. If I don't believe the characters, if I'm like, nobody would do that. That person would never behave like that. How did that person live in that apartment, that fancy apartment, when apparently they work as a waiter in a diner? I don't believe it. I'm out of the movie. But if everything holds true for the character, then I'm in the movie. You know, if you get me to think of any movie I saw, even one that I saw fairly recently, I very rarely remember the plot. But the characters, I'll be like, it was about this person. So a movie is not just, here's this person. It's about a person who goes through a transformation. And I think this is such an important thing to keep in our minds when developing our screenplays. Somebody goes through something. You've always got a protagonist, and I know we can get into debates about ensemble movies and movies about two people and all that stuff. But when you pare down most movies, you will find it's about a person who goes on a journey and is changed in some way by that journey. And typically, if they're not changed by the journey, it will be a tragedy where they die. That's classical drama. So it's always about somebody who's going to go on this journey and something's going to happen to them and they're going to be changed by it. And it's the transformation that really we're here for. Now, the transformation doesn't need to be huge. In Hollywood movies, it often is. We go from somebody who is a complete sad sack and totally a mess, and at the end they're like, they're triumphant and they're in love and everything's great. And that's the Hollywood arc. indie movies and art house movies and European films, the transformation will often be much more subtle and much smaller. It's not that the person is completely one thing at the beginning and completely a different person at the end, but there's some little shift, some little transformation that gives us a deep sense of satisfaction as an audience. And I think if that doesn't exist, it's a problem for a script. Now, let's go back. We're sort of like jumping ahead of ourselves a little bit, but I want to talk about the foundation of characters and how to build an unforgettable character and how to create that character. I truly believe this work has to be done before you write your screenplay. I don't think this is something you just discover by writing your screenplay, and I don't think it's something you come up with after you've written your screenplay. I think this is absolute foundational work. Before you even write one word of your screenplay, you need to do the character work. You have to figure out exactly who this person is, the main character and the people around them. But I would always start with your main character and then build around them. So start with who is your hero or heroine. That's the first thing. You have to know everything about them, I believe, before you start writing your screenplay. And I mean everything. We need to get intimate with our characters. Some people freak out when I get really into this. They say, oh my God, I don't even know my spouse as well as this. And that's the level at which you want to know the person. It might even be more than you know yourself. Once you know who they are, the story becomes obvious. And this is why it's so important to do this work, because your characters create the story. And we always talk about these films, character-driven films, and that's what we mean, a film in which it's the character that creates the story. It's because of their unique flaw that certain things happen in the movie. It's because of their fears that certain things happen. It's because of their biggest worries that these things happen, right? So it's them that creates the story. But to be honest, I think all movies that are good are character-driven. Because as I said before, I believe the essence of a film, of a good film, is a believable story, something that you believe about this person. And it always has to be about their transformation. So it's always going to be about something at the beginning of the film. They have some area that's a weakness, that's a flaw, that's a vulnerability, that's a fear, that's a desire, some big driving thing that is going to be transformed by the events of the movie. The central character, as we said before, changing is definitely it's just part of it. It's got to be part of it. So once you know very clearly what it is that is their big weakness or their big flaw or their big desire or their big vulnerability or whatever it is, it will become very clear to you what has to happen in the film. It'll become very clear what the story needs to be about. And usually for me, I start my script writing process with no idea what the story is going to be, or a very flimsy idea of what the story is going to be. What I often have, though, is a character and perhaps also some themes that I want to explore. So, for instance, with my film Obsoletia, I had the idea of a man, and all I know at the beginning is he's a man, he's probably in his mid-30s or he's in his 30s. He is very attached to the past. He's very attached to the past. He does not want to move into the world of the future. And he really wants to save things that are disappearing. Now, this is kind of all I know at the beginning. He's obsessed with things that are becoming obsolete. And he really wants to hold on to things and not let things become obsolete because he really hates it. He hates the rate of change in the modern world. And he really loves old technologies. So this is what I have at the beginning. It's very flimsy. There's not really much to it. I know also that I want to explore the themes of obsolescence, of the rate of change. I think also into this, I feel into it and I'm like, it feels related to climate change to me, which might seem bizarre to you, but I just intuitively felt it. This is something that I wanted to explore in the film. So I know the themes and I know the character. Then I need to flesh out the character before I go forward any further. And so at this point, I don't need to worry about what the story of the movie is. It's like, let's just really hone in on this person and let them come to life. Let them become a real person. Now, my approach to doing this, and I've used this every film that I've made, this is what I do, is to write a character bio for that person, to write a biography of them before I even have a story for the film, before I have a plot line. And so I start to write the bio, and I'll start it really from the beginning of their life, from who their parents were, who the mother was, what she was like, the father, where they came from, how they met. I mean, so it actually starts even before the character is born. And then when this baby was born, how this baby was felt into the family? Did they have siblings? All the things, just getting into everything. When were they born? You know, what is their horoscope? The whole thing, just everything. How were they treated as a baby? As a baby, what was their temperament? Now, this might seem like way too detailed because honestly, it's not going to show up in the script. There's not going to be anything in the script that's going to be about what this child was like as a baby and the fact that they were the kind of baby that cried all the time and the mother could never soothe it. It's not going to be in the script. But I need to know it. I need to know it. And I go through their whole life with that level of detail, thinking about when they became a child. What kind of child were they? Were they the kind of child that was always outdoors and always had scrapes and cuts on their knees? Were they the kind of child that just wanted to sit with a book? It's like really just taking the time to dig deep into their story. Now, this is incredibly intuitive work. There's no right and wrong. You're creating a fictional character. So you can write whatever you want. But weirdly, my experience of this is I just intuitively know when it's the right thing and I intuitively know when it's not. Don't even ask me to explain this when it's a fiction, because surely I should be able to make up whatever I want, but I can't. There's already some sense in me. It's like an archaeological dig. I'm discovering a character who already exists, and this is a real person. And it all has to make sense, and it's these little details. So I build that up, and I go right through their life. You can do it depending on their age. You might have a character who's only 8 years old, in which case you would want to take a lot of time over every year of their life. If you're dealing with a character who's 80 years old, what you might want to do is just like each decade of their life and the major turning points of their life, the bigger, broader strokes. But I think it's so helpful to just map this all out. It helps so much. If you do this, I'm telling you, it will make your writing so much richer because you have all this knowledge and understanding of your character drawn as you write them. So they're no longer going to be cutouts. They're no longer going to be two-dimensional. They're no longer going to be cliches. They're going to be fully developed humans. And that's the thing that we're talking about today, creating unforgettable characters. How do you do this? You make them real. You breathe life into them. You give them the space to become people, not just little marionettes that are doing your bidding and working through the plot, but actual fully developed people with all the complexity that real people have. And it's that thing that as you understand, what do they want at different times in their life? What was their biggest dream for their life? How did they think their life would turn out? You really want to know all these things. Now, you do this right up to the present day. And when you get to the present day, I think it's really helpful to just write, for example, what their typical day is like. And I want you to know what their life is in the present time. Where do they work? It's so important. Get into their money. I think it's so important to know their money. As I mentioned before, I am bumped out of a film when I'm seeing people living in these lavish apartments who are apparently working as waitresses in diners. It just bumps me out of it. Know what their money is. How much money do they actually earn? How much money do they have in the bank? Do they own their home? Do they rent their home? Do they hope to own their home one day? Are they saving money? Are they terrible with money? Do they spend it all? This is so important to understand because this is what you will knit into the fabric of your script that will make it real, that will make it believable. Also around this, relationships, obviously. How do they relate to the people in their lives at this point when we're going to meet them? How do they have any relationship still with their parents, their family, their siblings? Are they close to them? Are they not? Who are their friends in their life? Who do they have a relationship? What is their relationship like? And knowing their intimate details. Get into their sex life. Even if they're single, what do they want? You cannot know too many things. You might not use even a tenth of this in your script, but this is the key. This is the foundation to creating an unforgettable character. Someone with depth, someone with complexity, somebody who's like a real human. Because real humans are not simple. None of us are simple. We are all like this mass of things. In one moment, we can be amazing and we can behave in fantastic ways. In other moments, we can be triggered and we can behave like so terribly. We're all like that. We all have all those capacities. And when you start to give your character that level of complexity and it comes from really understanding them at a deep level, that's when you'll start to create a really complex character and an interesting one. And the kind of character the actors really want to play because they can see that this is somebody who's fleshed out and who has complexity and who has subtext. Subtext is such an important thing in our characters, that even as they seem to want something on one level, they're behaving in a completely different way. Even as they're behaving in one way, we can feel underneath there's a whole different current going on. And that's what you're really aspiring to, I feel like, in your writing. That's what you're aspiring to in your films, because that's how people are. That's how people are. Soap opera people are the kind of people who just say what they mean all the time. Have you ever noticed that in soap operas? They're just like totally, they're literal. But human beings in the real world, we're not like that. And that's why soap operas don't feel real. Because real people, we're much more guarded than that about what we show and how we show it. Even people who give a lot outside, they're hiding a lot too. So when you get into this work with your character, you'll get to know them in that level, and you'll be able to write them on that level. And then you give your actors something really juicy, something that they get excited about. Producers will see it too. And it doesn't matter, even if you're planning to write a very plot-driven movie, you might be listening to this and going, but Diane, actually, I'm writing an action movie, and it really doesn't matter that much. It does. Honestly, it does. You think about the best action movies, there's always that human element to the main characters that is the reason that they are the best action movies. Same for horror films. Same for any movie. So you might think that this is not so important for your kind of movie because you're just working on a genre film and it's not that important. It's not a character-driven film. I am telling you, this is the key to elevating your work so far beyond being just a genre movie that won't be that interesting and that will have a tough time getting made because actors aren't that interested. As you are doing these character bios, something to pay particular attention to throughout the whole story is their flaws, their vulnerabilities, and their weaknesses. Because these are going to be the areas where things get really interesting. It's through our flaws as humans that we really connect. Have you ever noticed that? If somebody is perfect and they're flawless and they're happy and they've got it all sorted out, it's really hard to connect with them emotionally. It's that little crack, it's that little vulnerability, it's the little weakness that will let us in. So with your characters, even if you're planning to write some sort of superhero, and if you think of all the superheroes, all those like the really great ones, the memorable ones, they always have some sort of flaw. They always have something that lets us in as a human. If I said to you right now, Indiana Jones. Tell me about Indiana Jones. What's one thing that we all remember about Indiana Jones? We can all say definitely the hat, the whip. But there's something that if I mention this to people, they'll all go, oh, I know. What do I know about Indiana Jones? He's terrified of snakes. And you know, it's that thing when he is introduced as a character to us in the first movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it's absolutely genius. You have this magnificent chase sequence where he's being chased by all the things and he's escaping because here he is, he's like running and the big ball is chasing him and all these things are happening, but he gets out and he gets this little plane and he jumps in the little plane and he is like a mega superhero. He's incredible. And he gets in that thing and he starts flying. And if he just flew away, imagine for a second, then he's like this superhero that we can't really relate to. But what happens? He gets in that plane and he's like, there's a snake. And suddenly we all connect with him because now he's a human. So he's not superhuman. He's not untouchable to us. And if you look at all the great characters, there's always, even if you have somebody who is meant to be sort of up on a pedestal in a sense, there's always got to be that little thing that lets us in, that lets us connect, because that's the key to it. We connect in our vulnerability. We don't connect in our strength. So with your characters, no matter what their thing is, make sure that you are conscious of what their fear, their vulnerability, their weakness is, because that's going to be a real key, something that will let the audience connect with them. Thinking about what their weaknesses are that might go counterintuitive with what their public persona is. Once you know their flaws and fears, as well as their big desires, you're ready to think about what your story is. Because as we said at the beginning, the transformation of the character is going to be the backbone of any good script. It doesn't need to be a massive transformation. It can be a very subtle one. That's almost always what really gets us engaged as viewers. So once you know what the weakness is, or the desire, or the flaw, whatever this big driving thing is going to be, you kind of know immediately what they have to face in their films. When I was writing my film, Bleeding Heart, I started it completely with just an idea about a yoga teacher. And I was a yoga teacher for many years, and I spent a lot of time in the world of yoga. And I really wanted to write something that was about a woman who was a yoga teacher who, on the surface seems like everything is peace, everything is amazing, everything is perfect. And yet something doesn't feel right inside her. And yet there's something missing. Once I had this idea, everything is peace, I thought, well, the thing is, it's not in the world. And immediately I know what this film is going to be, is that she's going to be confronted with a situation, with a person who doesn't want peace. Now, how's she going to deal with that? And that's the driving, that's it. That's what that whole movie came from. Once I knew, like, this woman, it's like everything's perfect, but it's not. What's going to happen when she really has to deal with somebody who doesn't want peace? What then? How does this work? My first film, Obsolytia, the man who, he just doesn't want anything to change. He just wants everything to go into the past. Immediately I know he's going to have to meet someone who just wants to move into the future. I also knew immediately that his real fear, if he's trying to hold on to the past and he wants everything to go back, his real underlying deep fear is death, is the end of things. And so I knew he had to confront death. He had to sit with death. And that's the climax of the movie, is when he sits with a dead body. So once you know what the person is, that person, you can start to build the people around them, because you have to have the opposite of them. Once you know one person is all about peace, you're going to have one person that's all about violence. If you have one person that's all about moving into the past and holding on to the past, you're going to have one person who's all about moving into the future. Drama is conflict. Movies need conflict to exist. Once you know that one thing about this person, you'll immediately have a sense of what needs to be around them. If people in the movie are all the same and they all want peace, you got a boring movie. It's not a movie. It's always about the counter effect, energy and counter energy. So once you know that person and what that person is, okay, now we're going to have the opposite of that, because that's what's going to trigger them. That's what's going to make them confront what they don't want to confront. And that's the thing with our stories. Once you know the person's flaw, weakness, vulnerability, or big desire, it becomes very clear what the film has to be about, because they have to be confronted with that thing. They have to deal with it in a way that they've always avoided. And it becomes very, very clear at that moment what you'll need to do. This is the way to avoid writing cliched characters. And that's a big step to writing a good screenplay. If you can avoid the cliche, you'll be in a good place. So it's really doing this work and building in the complexities. I think too, when we're actually doing the character bio work, we were talking about this the other week when we talked about telling somebody's story. You want to be constantly looking for little details that aren't typical or that might be surprising, letting those come to you. For instance, if you started with the idea, I'm going to make a movie. I have this idea for this movie. I did actually have an idea like this once, which is a woman who's like 35 and she's really been a career woman. She's been very devoted to her career in the corporate world, to the extent that she's not really had many great relationships and she doesn't have a family of her own. She's a single woman and she has earned money. She's done well for herself, all these things. Now, this is so easy to become a cliche. It's those vulnerabilities. If you have a character who's very strong, what are their vulnerabilities? What are the things that would make them cry? What are the moments, the little things, the little details that would speak of something other than the cliche? And those are the things you have to find. And that's essential in that process of writing the bios. This is how we avoid writing the cliches. Just really actually at a certain point consciously, because we'll tend to just drop into types. And we think, oh yes, I know this woman. And our job as writers is to peel deeper than that. Because not one living human being on this planet is a cliche. Not one. We're all unique, beautiful, incredible individual people that are so complex. And our characters have to be like that too. And so we have to be conscious and just be watching out when we're doing the character bios and when we're building the characters, that we're not just letting them slip into the stereotypes. And that takes stepping out of yourself sometimes, because it's really easy to be like, no, this is who they are. And it all makes sense. Yeah. But nobody is just one thing. Nobody is just the hard career woman. There's always going to be some little details that will totally contradict it. So it's looking for those, and that's when it gets really juicy. But I love doing the character work. I think it's just so much fun and so incredible how people that don't exist become real to you. It's a little nutty. I'll give you something else too, actually. When I was developing Obsolydia, so I had the idea of the character who's obsessed with obsolete things. I actually started a blog and wrote a blog from his perspective. I pretended to be him and wrote a blog pretending to be him, which was kind of an interesting thing to do. I think you do whatever it takes to really get into the character, to inhabit them. And that was definitely fun. I kept the blog, I think, for about 6 months. I wrote in it every few days, cataloging and just pretending that I was him, writing from his perspective. So I think whatever you need to do to really feel your way into this person and feel your way into all their complexities and depths, you do it. But then the question is, how much do you actually need to put in the script and how much needs to be revealed? And that's a great question. And all I can say about that is that over different drafts, you're going to hone it and fine tune it until you get it right. And sometimes in the first couple of drafts, you give too much away. You tell too many things. Something that was very interesting for me with my film Obsolydia, I discovered through the character work that his mother had died when he was young. And that was a big unprocessed grief for him. And that was a big part of his fear of death and a big part of his fear of things going away, things disappearing. And this was coupled with the fact that his father was still alive, but his father had Alzheimer's and quite severe dementia and was now living in an assisted living facility. And so in the original script of the film and how we actually filmed it, there was this beeline story about that. And it was about how every day he would call the assisted living center to check in about his dad, but he didn't like to visit it because it was too upsetting for him. And at the end of the movie, he actually goes and visits his father. We actually filmed this as well. This was a part of the script that we set out to film, and we filmed that as it. And it wasn't until I got into editing that I realized it was too much. Because it was such a big thing, suddenly, this man healing his relationship or healing his understanding of his father's illness, the fact that his father's forgotten who he is. It was so big. And if that's what the film is about, then that's what the film is about. But the film's not about that. The film is about him going on this journey and nearly falling in love and being rejected and coming to terms with himself that it's okay for things not to work out. It's okay for things to die. It's okay for things to pass away. That's what the film's about. Not about a man healing his relationship with his father with Alzheimer's. So, to wrap this up, character, I think, is the key to a good screenplay. I don't think you can have a good screenplay without having great characters. When we think back of all the movies, the best movies that we've ever watched, the thing that will stand out to you is the character. So what I'd love to do probably in a future podcast is talk about characters and how we use dialogue and how we introduce them and all the things in the script, the mechanics of it, of how we actually, once we've done this deep psychological work, so we've built our very rich character in our own minds, how we bring that character to life in our screenplay so that anybody reading it just gets it. They see it, they feel it, and they feel this person's humanity in such a way that they want to play it or they want to be a part of bringing that character story to life. And that honestly is one of the biggest keys to getting your movie made. If you crack that, if you write a character that people want to play, it's going to be great. I had this experience with my film Bleeding Heart. We made that movie for such a small amount of money. The actors all worked for SAG scale, so it's not a lot of money. But why did they do it? Because they wanted to play those parts. Jessica Biel was like, I want to play this part. So writing a character that actors think, I'm into this, I want to do this because there's some complexity and I get to do this and I get to do that. And I'll get to be this one thing but have this going on. This is what excites actors. And so you want to take the time to get it right. That's going to be one of the most powerful things for your film. There is a module on this in my screenwriting course, Write Your Screenplay in 8 weeks. It's a big part of the work that we do. And as I said, there's so much more to say about it. But that's a nice little introduction to it. Creating unforgettable characters. It starts with creating a person, creating a human, not a type, and not somebody who's just going to be a puppet for your story, but an actual real human. And then it becomes so much fun. Because when you do that, that's that thing when you then start writing your screenplay and it's like they come alive and they start talking for themselves because they're a person. And just a reminder, on this Friday, we are kicking off the Secrets of Screenwriting Success. I'm so excited to do this with you. I'm just like so many ideas of what I want to share and how I'm going to share it. And I think it's going to be just such an exciting masterclass. So if you haven't signed up for that yet, do it. It's dianebell.com/secrets. And once you sign up, as I mentioned before, this class is going to take place in its own little pop-up Facebook group. So you might already be in the Shoot from the Heart Society. If you're here with me live right now, you are. But it's going to be in a different one. So make sure you request to join the other one. You won't get in the other one until Friday, but just request it. And one last thing before I wrap up. If you have any suggestions for the podcast, if there's a question that you have about screenwriting or filmmaking or any of the things, please put it in the Facebook group. I would love to hear your suggestions, your questions, things that you're like, I would love to hear a podcast on this, that, or the other, and we will definitely do it. This one has definitely made me think that there's one more to do on this subject for the podcast, which is about how to nail your character on the page, which is such an important thing, because you could have this fleshed out, amazing character in your brain, but unless you can bring them to life on the page in your screenplay, it's just going to be in your brain. So that's going to be, I think, another podcast soon, how to bring your unforgettable character to life on the page. And we'll get really into some craft and technique.